The first light of dawn crept slowly across the Montana plains, brushing the horizon with pale gold, as if unsure whether the day deserved brightness. Elias Warren stood on his porch, boots planted firmly on the worn wooden boards, staring out across the land he once believed would hold a lifetime of memories. Now it held only echoes. His ranch stretched wide and wild in every direction. Untamed grass swayed in the early wind, rolling like ocean waves beneath the pastel sky. The barns, once filled with laughter and the clatter of tools, sat quiet, too quiet, like old men trying to remember who they used to be. The cattle were few now, scattered dots across the distant field. Even the horses, loyal as they were, moved without the energetic snorts they used to greet him with. Elias closed his eyes and inhaled the cold morning air. The scent of dew clung to the breeze, mixed with the faint smell of hay drifting from the barn. He tried to let that calm him, to ground him. But some mornings were harder than others. Some mornings the silence was too familiar. He pushed open the creaking barn doors and stepped into the dim interior. Dust motes swirled in the air, illuminated by the thin strip of sunlight piercing through a cracked window. The stalls were mostly empty, one of the many consequences of rebuilding life alone. His boots echoed with each step. "Morning, Scout," he murmured. The only horse left in the barn, a brown gelding with a white stripe down his nose, lifted his head and flicked an ear toward Elias. He gave a soft snort, stepping forward as Elias approached with a brush. "I know." "It's earlier than usual," Elias continued, brushing the horse's mane with slow, practiced strokes. "Couldn't sleep again." Scout nudged him gently, as if offering comfort the way a horse could. Elias smiled faintly and leaned his forehead against the animal's warm neck. Of all the things that had survived the wildfire, of all the memories that came with it, Scout was one of the rare blessings. The horse understood him in ways people no longer could. After finishing with the horse, Elias stepped out of the barn and grabbed his gloves from the fence post. The sky was brighter now, but clouds rolled in from the west, dark and heavy. Rain was coming, and it looked like the kind that carried more than water. He walked along the fence line, checking for broken boards. Most were sturdy, but some still leaned slightly from past storms. He worked quietly, hammering nails, tightening wire, trying to lose himself in the rhythm. Routine kept his mind from drifting too far into the past, but it only worked for so long. As he lifted another board into place, the faintest crackle of wood shifting in the wind brought a flash of memory, the sound of burning beams collapsing in the heat. His breath caught. He blinked hard, trying to clear away the images that pushed forward. Smoke thickened the air, the heat of the wildfire searing his face, the frantic search through flames, shouting Marin's name until his voice broke. He hadn't found her, and nobody else did either. The sheriff's words had been soft but heavy. "Elias, I'm sorry. The fire spread too fast. No one could have survived in that canyon." Even now, years later, Elias tightened his jaw as the memory resurfaced. He set the board down and pressed his hands against his knees, eyes squeezed shut. He reminded himself to breathe. He reminded himself the fire was gone. He reminded himself he was still here. But being alive didn't mean he wasn't burned. He stood and continued working, forcing himself into motion. Motion was the only thing that kept him from drowning. By noon, the wind shifted sharply, sweeping across the land with a colder bite. Clouds swallowed the sun, turning the sky into a deep sheet of gray. The quiet of the ranch thickened. Animals grew restless, and even Scout pawed the ground anxiously. A storm was coming faster than expected. Elias finished his checks and hurried to secure the barn doors, tightening ropes, sliding boards into place. The air carried static, the kind that prickled against skin, and the faint rumble of thunder rolled in the distance. Inside the house, he lit a few lamps for warmth and pulled his jacket tighter around himself. This house had once been filled with warmth and chatter. Marin used to hum while she cooked breakfast. She used to kiss him on the cheek before sending him out to work. She used to dance barefoot across the wooden floor, just because the morning sun felt nice. Now the house was filled with faded photographs and dust. Pictures of moments he couldn't bear to take down, even though looking at them hurt. He sat at the table with a cup of coffee, letting the steam rise into the dim room. Outside, the wind grew louder, rattling the windows. Thunder rolled again, closer this time. The rain began to fall in sheets, pattering against the roof like urgent fingers tapping for attention. Elias leaned back, staring at the flickering light of the lamp. Storms always made him restless. They reminded him too much of the night everything changed. The night the fire raged through the canyon. The night he lost Marin. He had searched for her afterward, desperate, refusing to accept what everyone else seemed so certain of. But eventually, even hope had limits. Or so he thought. A sudden gust shook the house, followed by a sound that didn't belong to the storm. Knocking. Loud, frantic knocking. Elias stiffened. No one ever came here. Not during a storm. Not ever. He set his cup down slowly and stood. The knocking came again, harder this time. Wind howled through the cracks in the walls as he moved toward the door, boots thudding softly on the wooden floor. His hand hovered over the handle for a moment. He wasn't afraid, just confused. He pulled open the door. Rain poured in sheets behind two small figures standing on his porch. They were drenched, shivering violently in the storm's icy wind. Identical, little boots muddy, hair plastered to their cheeks, eyes wide with desperation and hope tangled together. Two little girls. Twins. They looked no older than 6 or 7. Elias swallowed. What in the world? One of the girls stepped forward, her voice trembling as much as her shoulders. "Are you Elias Warren?" He blinked, stunned. "Yes, I am." Rain dripped from their tiny chins, from their sleeves, from the tips of their shaking fingers. The second girl lifted her head, eyes shining with something fragile and heartbreaking. "Because you're our daddy!" And the storm behind them roared. Rain poured off the porch roof in heavy sheets, splashing cold water onto the boots of the two girls who stood trembling before Elias. For a moment, he simply stared at them, trying to process the impossible words that had just fallen from their lips. His heart thudded once, hard, as if it had missed a step. The storm roared behind them, the wind tugging at their thin jackets and dripping clothes. They looked so small, too small to be out here alone. He finally found his voice. "Come inside, quick! You'll freeze out there." The girls exchanged a worried glance, but when he ushered them in, they obeyed, stepping over the threshold with hesitant feet. The warmth of the house wrapped around them, though their shivers didn't stop. Elias shut the door firmly behind them, muting the storm's wild cries. "Sit here," he said, guiding them toward the living room. "Let me get some towels." He hurried down the hall, grabbed 2 large towels, and returned. The twins stood awkwardly in the center of the room, looking unsure of what they were allowed to touch, what they should say, or whether this was even truly happening. He knelt and draped a towel over each girl's shoulders, patting gently to help warm them. Their faces, he couldn't stop staring. Identical round cheeks, identical brown eyes, identical expressions trembling between fear and hope. Their features had a familiarity that twisted his insides. They looked like someone he had loved with every piece of himself, someone he had lost. He swallowed. "Let's start with your names." The girl on the left spoke first, voice soft. "I'm Lila." The girl on the right added quietly. "And I'm Laurel." "Lila and Laurel," he repeated. Their names were beautiful, delicate. Names he never knew. Names he should have known. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Both nodded, though their eyes flicked toward each other first, as if checking whether it was okay to accept his kindness. Elias moved to the kitchen, lit the stove, and began heating a pot of leftover stew he'd made earlier. It wasn't much, but it was warm and filling. While he prepared bowls, he watched them from the corner of his eye. They walked slowly around the living room, studying the old pictures on the walls and mantel, pictures of him and Marin. Their wedding photo, the one at the county fair. The one where Marin kissed his cheek after he'd built her a porch swing. The one of them by the river, laughing as water splashed everywhere. The twins paused in front of that last one. Laurel reached up with gentle fingertips, as if touching the picture might bring the moment to life. "That's Mama," Lila whispered. Elias's breath stopped. Completely stopped. He walked over slowly. Laurel looked up at him, her small voice trembling. "Do you still remember Mama?" He felt something crack inside himself, soft but deep. "Every day," he answered, his voice thick. They both smiled. A small, sad smile that told him they remembered her too. Not from pictures, from life. He set the bowls on the table. "Come eat." They sat obediently. Laurel held her spoon awkwardly, hands still stiff from the cold. Lila took a careful sip of the hot broth and closed her eyes in relief. While they ate, Elias leaned on the counter, watching. The storm hammered the windows. Thunder rolled like distant drums. But inside the house, for the first time in years, the silence was different. It was alive. After a few minutes, he cleared his throat gently. "You said earlier that I'm your father. Who told you that?" The girls traded another look. It was Laurel who finally spoke. "Mama did," she said. "She told us all about you." "When did she tell you?" Elias asked. Lila fidgeted with her spoon. "Every night before bed." The words struck him with surprising force. He gripped the edge of the counter to steady himself. Marin had talked about him. She had talked about him every night. She had lived. She had known he existed, and she had told their children, his children, stories about him. But if she had been alive all this time, why hadn't she come home? He forced his voice to remain steady. "Your mother, where is she now?" Both girls lowered their heads. Laurel's small fingers curled around her bowl. "Mama got sick," she whispered, "and she didn't wake up." Elias's stomach clenched. "She got sick?" he repeated slowly. "How long ago was that?" 3 days, Lila said. "We were staying in a shelter, but they said we couldn't stay forever. And Mama told us once that if anything ever happened, we should find you. So we ran away." Elias looked at the 2 small figures before him, shivering slightly, brave out of necessity, carrying burdens no child should ever have to hold, and felt a wave of protectiveness crash over him. "You came here alone?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "We walked to the bus stop," Lila said. "We remembered how Mama said your ranch was in the wide fields. So we asked the bus lady to take us to the place with the most grass. And then we walked the rest." Laurel finished. "We looked for a house with a blue barn." Elias felt tears rise behind his eyes. He blinked them back, but one escaped regardless. He turned away quickly to wipe it before the girls could see. The blue barn. Marin's idea. She'd said a blue barn made the land feel like it touched the sky. He needed more answers. But not now. Not while they were still soaked, exhausted, and scared. "Let's get you both dry," he said. "Then we can talk more." He led them to the bathroom and handed each a clean, oversized shirt. They changed quickly while he stepped into the hall, giving them privacy. When they emerged, swallowed by fabric far too big for them, they looked even smaller. Laurel's hair clung in damp curls around her face. Lila hugged her arms to her chest. "Come," Elias said gently. "Sit by the fire." He lit the fireplace, coaxing the flames until warmth spread across the room. The twins sat on the rug, curling close to the heat. He draped a blanket behind them, making sure they were comfortable. After a long moment, Laurel looked up at him. You don't think we're lying, do you?" Her voice trembled with something painful. Fear of being unwanted. "No," Elias answered immediately. "I don't." He meant it. He truly did. Something deep inside him recognized them. Not in a logical, proven way, but in the way a heart knows truth before the mind catches up. He sat beside them, though at a careful distance, not wanting to overwhelm them. They watched the fire flicker, their eyes reflecting the dancing light. "Can you tell me," Elias said softly, "what Mama told you about me?" The twins' faces brightened. Lila scooted a little closer. "She told us you're kind," she said. "And that you always wanted to teach us the stars," Laurel chimed in. "And that you carved tiny wooden animals. She said you made a whole family of deer once." Elias's breath hitched. That was true. He had carved a whole set of deer for a child they dreamed of having someday. A child he thought he'd never meet. The girls didn't stop. "Mama said you loved horses more than breakfast," Lila said. "And that, when you're thinking hard, you scratch your eyebrow like this," Laurel added, copying his gesture perfectly. He touched his eyebrow, stunned. They giggled softly. Then came the moment that made Elias's chest tighten so sharply he had to close his eyes. Laurel whispered, "Mama said the happiest she ever felt was when she was with you." The fire crackled, the storm roared, and Elias felt the room grow impossibly still. He pressed a hand to his forehead and took a slow, trembling breath. They weren't lying. These girls, they were pieces of Marin. They were pieces of him, living proof that something impossible had happened, something beautiful, something terrifying. He stood suddenly, not out of fear, but out of the sudden, overwhelming need to do something, to act. "We're going to find your mother," he said firmly. "I promise you that." The twins' eyes widened in hope. Laurel reached for Lila's hand, squeezing it tightly. "You mean it?" Lila whispered. Elias knelt before them, looking into their scared, hopeful faces. "Yes," he said. "Tomorrow morning we start searching. I won't lose her again." Both girls lunged forward at once, wrapping their small arms around him. The embrace startled him, not because he didn't want it, but because of how fiercely they held on. As if this moment, this stranger-turned-savior, was the only thing keeping them from crumbling. Elias hesitated only a breath before gently hugging them back. Their wet hair brushed against his cheek, their small hearts beating frantically against his chest. He whispered, barely audible, "I've got you. Both of you." The storm slammed against the windows, but in the center of that quiet living room, the world felt different. For the first time in years, Elias felt something warm crack open inside him. Hope. Later, after the girls fell asleep curled together under a thick blanket on the couch, Elias stood nearby, hands in his pockets, staring at them with a mix of awe, fear, and overwhelming tenderness. They looked peaceful now, their breathing soft, their tiny fingers interlaced, exhausted, but safe. He turned off the lamps, leaving only the soft, golden glow of the firelight. As he stepped back, he whispered into the quiet room, "I won't fail you, any of you." Outside, thunder boomed. Inside, two little strangers slept in the house of the man who had never stopped loving the woman who raised them. And for the first time in 6 long years, Elias Warren dared to believe that tomorrow might bring him back to the one thing he thought he lost forever. His family. Morning came slowly to the ranch, slipping through the clouds as though unsure whether the world beneath was ready for its light. Elias Warren had barely slept. He had dozed on and off in his old armchair, waking every time the fire hissed or one of the twins shifted on the couch. His eyes felt heavy, yet his nerves buzzed with a restless energy he hadn't felt in years. He stood now in the kitchen, quietly stirring oatmeal on the stove. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon. He'd added it without thinking, remembering how Marin used to sprinkle a little on top whenever the mornings were cold. The pot simmered, and Elias wiped a tired hand across his brow. Behind him, a soft rustling came from the couch. He turned to see Lila sit up first, rubbing her eyes with tiny fists. Laurel followed moments later, stretching her arms like a kitten, waking from a nap. "Good morning," Elias said gently. Lila blinked at him. "Is it still raining?" "No, the storm passed overnight." Laurel slid off the couch, blanket still wrapped around her shoulders like a cape. She approached him with careful steps, as though still unsure how close she was allowed to be. "Did you sleep?" she asked. "A little," Elias replied, trying to smile. "You too?" Lila nodded. It was warm. Warm. He couldn't remember the last time that word had applied to this house. "Wash up," he said. "Breakfast will be ready soon." The girls padded off to the bathroom, their small footsteps echoing softly in the quiet house. Elias returned to stirring the pot, though his thoughts churned harder than the oatmeal. Today was the beginning of something he didn't fully understand. Something terrifying and hopeful all at once. When the girls returned, hairbrushed and eyes more awake. He served them each a bowl. They sat side by side at the table, feet dangling from the chairs. Eating slowly, he sat across from them, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee he barely tasted. "Are we really going to look for Mama today?" Lila asked, her voice small but steady. "Yes," Elias said. Laurel looked down at her bowl. "What if we can't find her?" He leaned forward slightly. "We will," he said, with a certainty he wasn't entirely sure he deserved to feel. "We'll look everywhere, and we won't stop." Both girls stared at him, their eyes fragile and full of something he recognized too well, fear of losing someone again. Elias felt a pang in his chest. He set down his mug and stood. "Come on," he said. "We've got a lot to do." They stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The storm had washed the land clean. Everything glistened beneath the rising sun. Puddles shimmered on the ground. The grass sparkled with droplets of rain. The sky, once angry and gray, now stretched in soft blue and white streaks. Lila and Laurel stopped in the yard, staring at the wide open plains with awe. "It's so big," Laurel whispered. Elias watched them quietly. To him, the ranch had always felt too big, too empty, too quiet. Seeing it reflected in their eyes, new, wondrous, alive, made something stir inside him. He loaded an old canvas bag into the bed of his pickup truck. Water bottles, blankets, a first aid kit, a map, and a flashlight. Then he held the door open for the girls. They climbed in carefully, sitting close together. "Seat belts," he reminded them. They clicked the buckles in place. Elias got behind the wheel and started the engine. The truck rumbled to life, familiar and steady. As they pulled away from the ranch, Lila pressed her face to the window. "Mama would like it here," she said softly. "She loved it here," Elias murmured. Laurel looked at him. "She did?" "Very much," he answered, keeping his eyes on the road as the memory tugged at him. "She used to say this place felt like the middle of the world, where everything made sense." The twins smiled at the idea. Elias swallowed the tightness in his throat. They drove toward town, the old truck bumping along the dirt road. Fields rolled out on either side, dotted with cattle and swaying grass. The sun climbed higher, warming the land. As they reached the small main street of town, people glanced up in surprise. Elias hadn't driven into town much these past years, and certainly never with two little girls in his truck. The butcher looked up from unloading meat. The waitress at the diner paused mid-wipe on a table. Even old Mrs. Kramer nearly dropped her bag of feed when she saw them pass. The girls shrank down shyly in their seats. "Don't worry," Elias said quietly. "Folks here are good people. Just curious." He parked in front of the sheriff's office. The twins held hands as they followed him inside. Sheriff Holden looked up from his desk, coffee mug halfway to his lips. "Well, I'll be Elias Warren." His eyes landed on the girls. "And who do we have here?" Elias placed a steady hand behind each twin. "This is Lila, and this is Laurel." He paused. "They're Marin's children." Sheriff Holden blinked, stunned. "Marin? Elias, I thought." "I know," Elias said softly, "but she lived. And these girls, they're mine." The sheriff set down his mug slowly, taking in the truth with a long, measured breath. "Elias, I don't even know what to say." Lila and Laurel stood silently, glancing between the adults. Holden saw their worry and softened his tone immediately. "You girls hungry? I've got some cookies in the back." Their eyes brightened a fraction. Holden smiled and walked toward the kitchen, returning with a small plate. The twins each took one politely, nibbling at the edges. Elias took a seat across from the sheriff. "I need help. We need to find Marin." Holden nodded gravely. "Tell me everything." Elias explained what the girls had said. The shelter, Marin falling sick, the disappearance, and the last place she'd lived. The sheriff listened, jaw tightening. When he finished, Holden rose and pulled a folder from the wall. "I'll radio the neighboring counties," he said. "We'll check hospitals, ranger stations, shelters, anywhere she might have gone. But the girls mentioned she'd been living near the mountains? That's where we should start." Elias nodded. "We're heading there next." Holden looked at him with a mix of worry and admiration. "You sure you're ready for this?" "No," Elias admitted. "But I'm doing it anyway." Holden clapped his shoulder. "Good man. Be careful out there." Elias thanked him and walked the twins back to the truck. Lila climbed in, but Laurel paused, tugging on Elias's jacket. "Is the sheriff going to help Mama too?" she asked. "He will," Elias said. "Everyone will." Laurel nodded and climbed into the truck. The road toward the mountains wound through dense forest, cliffs rising in jagged layers. The trees grew taller, branches swaying gently in the breeze. Lila and Laurel kept their eyes glued to the windows, pointing occasionally at deer darting through bushes or birds flying overhead. After nearly an hour, the truck pulled up to a small cabin, nestled against a rocky hillside. The wood siding was faded, the windows dusted with dirt. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney. "This is it," Elias said quietly. The twins looked at the cabin with a mixture of fear and longing. They stepped out of the truck. Leaves crunched beneath their feet. Elias approached the door slowly and pushed it open. It creaked loud enough to echo through the trees. Inside, the cabin was simple, small, and cold. A thin blanket lay rumpled on the bed. A pair of children's drawings were pinned to the wall. Two stick-figure girls holding hands with a taller stick-figure woman. Mama plus Lila plus Laurel was written above in childish handwriting. Laurel ran to the drawing and touched it gently. "We made that for her," she whispered. Elias's chest tightened. He moved deeper into the room, scanning the shelves. A battered notebook lay on the table. He opened it softly, heart pounding as he recognized the slanted handwriting. Marin's handwriting. He flipped through pages filled with entries. Snippets of her life, little notes about the girls. Fears, hopes, memories she refused to let go of. And again, his name. One line nearly made him sit down. I wish Elias could see them. He would love them so much. He closed the notebook slowly, exhaling shakily. Lila peered up at him. "Mama wrote in that every night." Elias placed the notebook back with trembling hands. "She missed you both," he said, "and she missed me." Laurel's chin wobbled. "Do you think she was looking for you too?" He knelt before her. "I know she was." Lila pointed suddenly toward the door. "Look!" Footprints. Faint, but visible in the soft dirt trailing away from the cabin toward a narrow mountain path. "Those weren't there last night," Laurel whispered. Elias felt his pulse quicken. "Then she came back recently." The twins clutched his hands tightly, fear and hope mixed in their grip. "We follow her trail," Elias said. "Stay close." They began walking, step by step, up the narrow path into the mountains. The air grew cooler. The trees grew denser. The world quieted around them. The search had begun. And this time, Elias wasn't searching for memory or closure. He was searching for the woman he had loved, and for the family he never knew he had. The mountain path narrowed as Elias guided Lila and Laurel deeper into the woods. The air cooled with every step upward, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp soil. The twins walked close, their small hands gripping his sleeves whenever the terrain grew uneven. Sunlight filtered through the branches, scattering golden patches across the ground. At times, the beauty of it felt jarring, too peaceful, too calm, considering the fear that churned in Elias's chest. He paused at a clearing where the footprints reappeared in softer dirt. They were faint but unmistakable, adult-sized, slightly uneven, as though made by someone who struggled to stay steady. The twins crouched beside the impressions carefully, touching the edges of the prints with gentle fingers. "Do you think these are Mama's?" Lila asked. "I do," Elias said. He crouched beside them, inspecting the tracks the way he used to inspect cattle trails. The distance between each step was shorter than normal. Weight shifted irregularly. A patch of disturbed soil suggested someone had stumbled and caught themselves on a nearby tree trunk. Laurel looked up at him. She was tired. Elias nodded, forcing a breath through his tightening chest. "We need to keep moving before the weather changes again." Clouds were already gathering along the peaks ahead, thick and gray like bruises forming across the sky. Elias didn't like the look of them, but the trail was fresh enough that he knew Marin couldn't be too far ahead. That knowledge pulled him forward more than fear ever could. They followed the footprints along the slope, crossing shallow streams and weaving between large boulders that jutted from the earth like ancient guardians. The twins grew quieter as they walked, each step heavy with hope and worry. Laurel occasionally reached out to hold Elias's hand, her small fingers curling around his larger ones. He squeezed gently, letting her know he was right there. After an hour of hiking, they reached a stretch of terrain where the trees thinned, revealing a view of the valley far below. The wind picked up sharply, brushing their hair back and making their jackets flap. Lila shivered, and Elias immediately took off his own jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. She protested with a small shake of her head, but he simply fastened it gently. "You'll be warmer this way," he said. Laurel glanced down the mountainside. "Mama must have been so cold up here." "She's tough," Elias said softly. "She's always been tougher than me." Lila offered a tiny smile. "Mama told us that too." He paused at that, warmth flickering through his chest before the urgency returned. They kept walking, the path narrowing until they had to move single file. The ground beneath them grew rockier, the dirt giving way to gravel that shifted with each step. A sudden distant rumble made the twins jump. Thunder! Elias lifted his head to the sky. Thick clouds were now crawling over the peaks, swallowing the blue sky, inch by inch. A storm was building fast, faster than he expected. "We need to hurry," he said. They pressed forward with renewed urgency. The footprints veered left, away from the main trail, and headed toward a canyon cutting through the mountainside. The canyon was narrow, carved by centuries of wind and water, its walls towering high on either side. "Mama went this way?" Laurel asked. "It looks like it," Elias answered. He guided them carefully into the canyon, where the air grew cooler still. The walls muffled the wind, leaving only the sound of their footsteps echoing faintly. Small pebbles skittered beneath their shoes. Sunlight barely reached the ground here, creating long shadows. "Stay close," Elias said quietly. The canyon twisted in several places, each turn revealing more footprints, more signs of someone passing through. A discarded scarf clung to a thorny bush. A crushed water bottle lay half buried in the dirt. The twins recognized the scarf immediately. "That's Mama's," Lila whispered, picking it up gently. Laurel touched the fabric with trembling fingers. She was here. Elias felt a painful swell of emotion. Hope, fear, relief, terror, all clashing together. He crouched beside them. "She can't be far. You girls doing okay?" They nodded, though their eyes glistened with tears. He ruffled their hair gently before rising again. The canyon curved sharply to the right, and that's when Elias saw something that made him stop mid-step. A set of footprints leading upward toward a steep incline. And at the top, the sky beyond had darkened completely. Wind funneled through the canyon now with a sharp whistle. The storm was closing in. "We need to move quickly," Elias said, trying not to let worry edge into his voice. "But stay right behind me. Don't slip." The incline was steep, covered in loose gravel that slid underfoot. Elias climbed first, planting each step firmly before helping the twins up behind him. Laurel slipped once, but he caught her hand immediately and steadied her. "You're doing great," he said gently. They finally reached the top, and what lay beyond made them freeze. The canyon opened into a wide plateau overlooking a deep ravine. The ravine stretched like a scar across the earth, with rocky edges and twisted tree roots jutting out. On the opposite side, a narrow series of ledges led downward, carving a zigzag path into the shadowy depths. And there, on one of the lower ledges, something caught Elias's eye. His breath hitched. A strip of fabric, faded, torn, caught on a branch. Marin's fabric. Laurel gasped. "Mama!" Elias's heart pounded so hard he felt it in his throat. "She went down there." He scanned the ravine. The descent looked dangerous, especially with the storm approaching, but not impossible. Not if they were careful. But before he could say another word, the sky cracked open. Lightning flashed far above them. Thunder roared seconds later. Wind howled across the plateau, whipping their hair wildly. The storm had arrived. Rain followed in sudden sheets, hitting the earth with a force that made the dust leap into the air. Elias pulled the twins close. "We need shelter now," he said. "There should be overhangs near the ravine. Come with me." They hurried toward the edge, moving carefully across the slippery ground. The rain made the rocks slick, and Elias kept a firm hand on each girl's arm to steady them. The sound of the storm echoed through the canyon, like a heartbeat growing louder and faster. At last, he spotted an overhang to the right, large enough to shield them from the worst of the rain. He guided the girls beneath it. Water cascaded down the edge like a curtain. "Stay here," he said, kneeling in front of them. "I have to look around a little." "No," Lila protested immediately, grabbing his sleeve. "Don't leave us." "I won't go far," he said, brushing her hair gently. "I promise." He stepped to the edge of the overhang and peered down into the ravine again. The rain made visibility difficult, but some shape seemed to be lying against the side of the rock near the lower ledge. His breath froze. Then the wind shifted, clearing a curtain of rain for just a moment, and he saw her. A figure slumped beneath a rock archway on the ledge below, still, unmoving, sheltering weakly from the storm. Marin. Elias's vision blurred for a moment, with emotion so fierce he had to grip the rock wall just to stay upright. "She's there," he whispered hoarsely. "Girls, she's there!" The twins scrambled to his side, clutching his arms as they peered downward. Their breaths hitched in unison. "Mama!" Laurel cried softly, voice breaking. "We have to get to her," Lila whispered. Elias nodded. "We will." He took a steadying breath and began leading them down the narrow, slick path into the ravine. Every step felt like a battle against the storm. Rain hammered the rocks around them. Wind nearly knocked them sideways. But Elias kept the girls between himself and the wall, shielding them from the worst of it. As they descended, the figure on the ledge grew clearer. Marin lay curled slightly, her body trembling weakly. Her clothes were soaked. Her hair clung to her face. She looked thinner, her skin pale. But she was breathing. She was alive. "Hold on," Elias murmured, as though she could hear him over the storm. "We're coming. I'm here, Marin." The final stretch was the steepest. Elias lowered himself cautiously, then helped each twin down beside him. The moment his boots hit the ledge, he rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside her. "Marin," he whispered, voice cracking. "Marin, it's me." Her eyelids fluttered weakly. She struggled to focus. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she blinked again. Recognition dawning slowly through exhaustion and disbelief. "Elias?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Is this real?" He reached for her hand, his own trembling. "It's real. I'm here." "Mama!" the twins cried, rushing to her side, wrapping tiny arms around her. Marin's eyes widened at the sound of their voices. Tears welled and slipped down her cheeks. "My girls!" she breathed. "You found him!" Elias gathered them all into a protective embrace as rain thundered around them. "You're safe now," he whispered against her hair. "All of you. I won't lose you again." He lifted Marin carefully into his arms, her head resting weakly against his shoulder. The twins held onto him, one on each side. The storm roared, but Elias moved forward with a strength he thought he'd lost long ago, carrying the woman he loved through the rain, determined that this time no force on earth would tear them apart. The wind roared like a living thing as Elias carried Marin up the ravine trail, each step a battle against the storm's force. Rain drenched his clothes, making them cling heavily to his skin, but he didn't slow. Not for an instant. Lila and Laurel pressed close, gripping his jacket as they climbed beside him with wide, determined eyes. They stumbled occasionally on the slick rocks, but Elias steadied them with quick, protective touches. Marin's head rested weakly against his shoulder. Her breath came in faint, trembling sighs that made fear burn sharply through him. She was conscious, but barely, too exhausted even to speak. Her fingers, cold and frail, clung to the fabric of his coat as though the contact was the only thing anchoring her to the world. The moment they reached the plateau, the storm seemed to strike with renewed anger. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the trees in white flashes. Thunder boomed so loudly that Lila flinched and pressed her hands over her ears. Laurel held onto Elias's side with both hands as though anchoring herself to him. "We're going to be all right," Elias said over the wind. "Stay close. Don't let go." They pushed forward through the curtain of rain toward the truck, which was parked farther than Elias would have liked. Mud splashed beneath their feet. The path seemed longer now, stretched by fear and urgency. Marin stirred faintly in his arms. "Elias," she whispered, barely audible. "I'm here," he answered quickly. "Don't talk yet. Just breathe." She tried to lift her head but lacked the strength. Her eyes fluttered shut again. Elias felt panic claw at his chest, but forced himself to breathe steadily. He couldn't fail now. He wouldn't. "Daddy!" Lila cried, pointing toward the slope ahead. "The mud's getting deeper." Elias's chest tightened at the word. "Daddy." She had spoken it without fear this time, without hesitation, and hearing it fueled him with a strength he didn't know he still had. "We'll get through," he said, shifting Marin carefully in his arms. "One step at a time." The final stretch to the truck was the most treacherous. Mud sucked at their boots, pulling hard with each movement. Rain hammered down in relentless sheets. When they finally reached the truck, Elias lowered Marin gently into the passenger seat, adjusting the recline so she wouldn't slump forward. Her eyes flickered open briefly, meeting his. "You came," she whispered weakly. "Of course I came," he said, his voice shaking. "Hold on, Marin. Please." The twins climbed into the back seat. Laurel wiped her eyes with her soaked sleeve. "Mama, we found him, just like you said we should." A tear slipped down Marin's cheek. Her lips trembled in a faint smile. Elias shut the door gently and ran to the driver's side. He slid into the seat, started the engine, and turned the heater to full blast. The truck sputtered, resisting the wet, but finally roared to life. "Stay with me," Elias murmured to Marin as he pulled onto the road. "We're getting you help." The mountain road was nearly flooded, rivers of rainwater rushing across it. Elias drove carefully, white-knuckled, eyes sharp. The twins leaned forward between the seats, watching their mother anxiously. "Mama," Lila whispered. "Can you hear us?" Marin's eyelids fluttered. "My loves," Laurel pressed her hands to her mouth. "She's talking." Elias kept one hand on the wheel and reached with the other to touch Marin's wrist gently. Her skin felt too cold, too fragile. Every mile felt like a lifetime. The storm thrashed against the truck, wind howling and pushing them sideways. Elias gritted his teeth and pushed forward. When they finally reached the mountain clinic, a small building with flickering lights and a metal roof, the rain had begun to ease, but the sky remained heavy and bruised. Elias parked as close to the entrance as he could and rushed out to carry Marin inside. The twins hurried beside him, their small hands gripping the back of his coat. A nurse looked up from behind the counter, her eyes widening. "My God!" she gasped. "Get her into room 3 right now!" Doctors and nurses hurried forward, taking Marin from his arms carefully but swiftly. Elias felt her fingers slip from his grip, and for a moment he stood frozen, watching as they wheeled her down the hallway. His hands felt empty, his chest hollow. Laurel tugged on his shirt. "Is Mama gonna be okay?" Lila's lip quivered. What if she... Elias knelt and pulled them both into his arms. "She'll be okay," he whispered, though his own voice wavered. "She's strong. She's stronger than any storm." They clung to him. Trembling, he held them until the nurse returned. "Sir," she said gently, "you and the girls can wait here. The doctor will update you as soon as we know more." Elias nodded, still kneeling with his arms wrapped around the twins. He thanked her and sat on the small couch in the waiting area, pulling Lila and Laurel close. They huddled against him, shivering from cold and fear. Time moved strangely in the clinic. Minutes stretched into hours, measured only by the soft beeps of machines from behind closed doors and the hum of fluorescent lights. Every time footsteps approached, Elias lifted his head, heart pounding. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Raines stepped into the waiting room. "Mr. Warren?" he said. Elias stood immediately, gently setting the twins on their feet. "How is she?" The doctor's expression softened. "She's weak, dehydrated, and recovering from a severe fever. But you found her in time. She's going to pull through." Laurel burst into tears, relief breaking through fear. Lila hugged her tightly, crying too. Elias closed his eyes, exhaling for the first time since they'd reached the ravine. "Can we see her?" Lila asked, wiping her face. "Just for a moment," Dr. Raines said. "She needs rest, but she'll want to know you're here." Elias followed the doctor with the twins. The room was warm and quiet, machines softly beeping beside the bed. Marin lay under thick blankets, her skin no longer as pale. Her breathing was steadier. Her eyes fluttered open when she heard the door. "Mama!" Lila whispered. Marin lifted a trembling hand. The twins rushed to her side, climbing carefully onto the edge of the bed. She cupped their cheeks weakly. "My beautiful girls," she murmured, tears slipping down. "You're safe." Laurel buried her face against her mother's arm. "We were so scared." Marin kissed the top of her head. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." Elias stood back for a moment, giving them space. The sight of them together, Marin touching her daughters, the twins holding on to her as though they might never let go, made his throat tighten painfully. Marin turned her gaze to him slowly. Their eyes met. "Elias," she whispered. He approached, pulling a chair beside the bed. He didn't sit. He didn't trust his legs not to shake. "You're safe now," he said softly. "You don't have to be alone anymore." She stared at him as though memorizing every feature. "I thought you were gone." "I thought the same about you," he said. "But you survived. And the girls, they found me. They saved us." Her eyes filled with tears. "I wanted to come home, every day, but I didn't know how. I was scared and sick, and I didn't want to burden you if you were." "You were never a burden," Elias said, voice shaking. "Never. I would have looked for you forever if I'd known." Her hand reached for his. He took it gently, careful not to hurt her. Their fingers interlaced, familiar in a way that made memory ache. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You don't have to apologize," he said. "You're here. That's all that matters." She smiled faintly, weak but real. The twins laid against her sides, drifting slightly as exhaustion pulled at their small bodies. "Take them home," Marin murmured. "Let them rest." "We'll all go home," Elias said. "Together, when you're ready." The doctor allowed them a few more minutes before ushering the girls out to rest. Elias walked them to the truck, though neither wanted to leave. Lila looked back repeatedly. Laurel held his hand tightly. "Will Mama be okay tomorrow?" she asked. "She'll get better," Elias said, "and when she's strong enough, we'll bring her home." The twins nodded, though worry still lingered in their eyes. Marin stayed in the clinic for 3 days. Each day, Elias and the girls visited. They brought flowers from the hill near the ranch, drawings from the twins, a carved wooden bird Elias had made late one night when sleep refused to come. On the 3rd day, when Marin was finally strong enough to walk without help, Dr. Raines cleared her to leave. Elias stood beside the truck, helping her climb in gently. Lila and Laurel clung to her once she was settled, careful but overflowing with joy. "Home," Marin whispered, touching the window as they drove. "I never thought I'd see it again." When the ranch finally came into view, her breath hitched. The fields, the barns, the porch where she once danced barefoot. Everything familiar, yet different. Rebuilt, quieter, waiting. Elias helped her out of the truck, and as her boots touched the ground, emotion washed across her face. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He swallowed thickly. "It's better now that you're here." The twins pulled her toward the door, eager to show her everything they'd discovered. The house warmed with the sound of their voices, curiosity, laughter, questions, memories piecing themselves back together. Elias watched them from the doorway, leaning against the frame with a quiet smile. Marin glanced back, meeting his eyes, and in that moment, the years of emptiness seemed to melt away. Later that night, after the twins had fallen asleep upstairs, Elias and Marin stood on the porch, The stars stretched in endless patterns above them. The night air was cool, soft, peaceful. Marin leaned gently against his arm. "Thank you for finding me." He looked at her, voice low. "I never stopped loving you." She took his hand, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Then let's start again." Elias squeezed her fingers gently. Together, they stood under the vast Montana sky, a family reunited, hearts mending in the quiet embrace of home. And for the first time in 6 long years, Elias felt whole. From the quiet ranch scarred by loss to the storm-lashed mountains where love was rediscovered, Elias, Marin, Lila, and Laurel proved one timeless truth. Family isn't defined by the time lost, but by the courage to find each other again. Their journey reminds us that even after years of silence, even after heartbreak and uncertainty, love can still return, stronger, braver, and more beautiful than before. And sometimes, the darkest storms lead us right back to the people we were always meant to come home to. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles so you never miss another unforgettable tale of hope, healing, and love on the open frontier. Hit that subscribe button now. More powerful stories are waiting for you.